Last time in part one of this short series, we focused on the question, why does Jesus always come in a storm? What is there about the storms in our life that come up out of nowhere with a purpose we don't always understand? Now, we looked at the lesson Jesus was delivering to his disciples and learned that we need to be prepared for the storm because Jesus has a plan for us in the midst of it, no matter how difficult the storm. Jesus is never deterred by it. He'll always come. But our job is to discover his purpose in the storm and allow the Holy Spirit to lead us through it. Let's look at this moment in the lives of the disciples a little deeper. Hi, I'm Pastor Tom. And this morning I want us to think about the series of events that preceded this illuminating moment in the lives of the disciples when Jesus came walking toward them on the water. He had a plan, but they didn't see it. What happened the last time he told them to get into a boat? Didn't they get a lesson in dealing with fear? Let's let John refresh our memory. Matthew 8:18 and 23 to 27. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross over to the other side. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up out of the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us! We're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Out there in the middle of the sea on that night, in the midst of their fear, they completely forgot how Jesus had previously led them into the very same circumstances and delivered them safely. In fact, the circumstances were almost identical. The only difference was that Jesus himself led them the first time, and the second time he sent them alone. But a great deal had transpired between the first and second times. The disciples had witnessed a great deal. Jesus had expected them to grow in faith between the trials. For example, they saw Jesus cast out demons. They saw Jesus heal the multitudes. They saw him give sight to the blind. Jesus gave the disciples power and authority over all devils and to cure diseases, which they used. They saw Jesus cure the leper. And most recently, they observed the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It would be very easy to sit here on Monday morning in the quarterback's chair and ask the poignant question, why didn't they get it? Well, as I look at those 6 preceding bullets, it's pretty easy to substitute lessons that Jesus has taught me. And notably, each lesson has built upon the previous one. The same applied to the disciples out there in that little boat. The first time Jesus said, "Follow me into the boat, and we will go across." And the second time he said, "Get in the boat before me." So could it be that Jesus stayed up on that mountain, watching and praying for them, just to give them some extra time to come to the conclusion that if he told them to go, he knew what they were getting into? Look at Matthew 14:22. And immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat, go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. I have found that Jesus uses storms in my life for at least 2 purposes. They're either for correction or perfection. And I think the reason he uses them is because putting me in the midst of one is often the only time he has my full attention. And at that moment in life, I'm all ears. Hebrews 12:6. Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Proverbs 3:11 and 12. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights. Old Testament, New Testament, his word never changes. So there they were in that little boat, being tossed about in great fear for their lives. And just at the moment that all appeared to be lost, they see Jesus walking on the water. But instead of rejoicing, their fear increased. Isn't that just like many of us? How many times do we start out in the spirit and wind up in the flesh, standing there in the midst of our own storm in all our fleshly power, just about to be overwhelmed. Well, there were these intrepid disciples, the core of Jesus' inner circle. They were the very ones that just a few hours earlier had witnessed one of his greatest miracles. But they were so shaken with fleshly fear that their minds were dull to the spirit, a state of mind that Paul referred to. Ephesians 1:18 and 20. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand. After being fully in the flesh, the first thing they thought was that it was a ghost. Sound familiar? I refuse to reveal the number of times in the midst of a storm that I have allowed my imagination to run away with me. My imagination gets me in more trouble because it always makes things much worse than they really are. And it seems as though it gets the strongest just about the time that Jesus wants to deliver me from my circumstances. It's at that moment that I'm almost paralyzed by the fear, and I forget that we walk by faith, not by sight. I forget that it's my shot to call. Mark 6:48 and 49. He saw the disciples straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out. You know, there's something here that almost slips by us as we read the description of this incredible miracle. In fact, Mark is the only one who points it out to us. He was about to pass them by. Now, I don't think Jesus would have walked to Capernaum and left them to drown in the midst of the storm. But look what he did. He waited until they cried out, and then he immediately responded. Psalm 9:10. Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Even in their fear, I can imagine the collective sigh of relief that rose up out of that little boat, hoping beyond hope that it really was Jesus out there. Would he really have walked on by, leaving them there to drown? Well, at least one of them was not about to sit in that waterlogged little boat. Thanks to faithful Matthew, we have what I think is the most critical part of this miracle. It's not only our shot to call, it's our action to take. Matthew 14:28. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Good old Peter. No matter how brash or reckless, you have to admire him. But notice that in rising to the challenge, he teaches us two very important lessons. Jesus said, fear not, and our Peter immediately responded, Lord, if this is really you, just say the word and I'm on my way. I have finally determined, through much pain, that this is the only way to respond to Jesus. It's always correct to respond to his voice. Lord, let me come to you no matter what. But notice that Peter didn't say this as he was jumping out of the boat. He said, if thou bid me. That's a big difference. He stayed in the boat until Jesus told him to come. So many times we hastily jump out of our boat instead of waiting on the Lord's timing. Just because we hear him doesn't mean that we're to forsake all and jump in with both feet. Peter was fully ready to step out on that boiling sea, but not until his Lord told him to. Matthew 14:29. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Once the word was given, Peter immediately took the step of faith. Now, our challenge this week is to remember that we're to always be prepared for the next storm in life, knowing that Jesus always comes in the storm because he has a purpose in the storm, and he's just waiting for us to stand in faith, to call the shot, and take the action. Now, next week, we'll consider two more elements to understanding why Jesus comes in the storm, in part 3 of this series. Thanks for joining us here each week, and if you haven't subscribed and liked us, please do, and share these videos to help us get the message out to the bride of Christ, that in the midst of her storm, she needs to look up and keep her eyes on Jesus. He'll always come in response to her faith, and she has to call the shot and take the action. So until next Wednesday morning, remember, I'm always here to help you on your journey from the cross to spiritual maturity. Now have a great week in Jesus, and God bless.